In this segment, I want to give a general overview of military leadership principles, specifically Army leadership principles. Perhaps we could break these down initially into five categories. Number one, establishment of trust. In a typical organization today, if you feel that the CEO is just trying to line their own pockets with cash at the expense of their employees, you might not have a lot of trust. And that is not the way to get a good approach in developing organizations. A second characteristic of military leadership principles is the emphasis on values-based leadership. In other words, instead of generalities, we're going to be talking about specific values. And if you hold to these values, you can build an organization. If you don't, you're going to have problems. A third characteristic might be shared responsibility. That is, it's not the boss's responsibility to do something or the team's responsibility to do something per se. It's everyone's responsibility, everyone working together. Number four, another characteristic might be the exhibit professionalism. That is, look the part and act the part of a leader in all activities on a daily basis. And finally, number five, commit to be a learning organization. That is to say, continually strive to read and study and improve. So those are the five things that we might start with. Well, what are some of the principles or concepts that we'll be covering in this series? There's so many. Some of the things we might ask about an organization is, what is its purpose? And I know that sounds like a generality, but many times people don't ask that fundamental question to begin with. What is its vision? What does it intend to become? What is its mission? What is it trying to accomplish? What are its goals? What are its values? What are its processes, procedures, practices, policies, and activities to achieve the foregoing? In other words, what we're trying to attain is a community in the ultimate sense. If you will, sort of the hackneyed phrase, a band of brothers. How do we achieve this? Well, we start with investing in human capital. We don't look at people as just merely interchangeable parts in a machine. It's true each has his or her own skills, but each is unique and can contribute to the whole in a very unique way. So we look at this approach comprehensively, progressively, and sequentially to achieve our objectives. An interesting a slogan that we might apply with due regard to our friends in the Marine Corps is a slogan called Semper Flexus. In other words, always flexible. One characteristic that's unique to military leadership and specifically to Army leadership, and you hear this over and over again when people are exposed to it for the first time, is what is called an after-action review and lessons learned. And the goal here is to codify, archive, disseminate, and use lessons that we learn in the course of our daily business. Now, this is something all of us could use in any organization on a daily basis, because as life goes on, new things happen, and we learn better ways of doing things. The problem is, in a typical organization, these lessons learned are lost. They're not preserved, they're not codified, and even more important, they're not utilized in the future. You remember the old saying, he who refuses to read history is condemned to repeat it. So, how could we use an after-action approach in our organization? The first question we would like to ask is, what actually happened? The Army uses the term ground truth for this. In other words, not impressions of what happened, but what actually happened in a very objective way. We start with that. And we invite all who were involved with an activity to participate in this exercise, from the very lowest or newest employee to the very top. In other words, what we're driving after is ground truth. Second question we'd ask is, what went well? What did we do right? What would we like to do again? What would we do again in similar circumstances? And the third thing we would ask is, what can be improved? What could we do better? What should we change for the future? These are some great questions, and if you ask these on a constant basis in an organization, you will strive for improvement. The key to a military leader is knowing when to stay in the box, as it were, and when to apply a doctrinal solution. There are times you should follow procedures. I mean, for example, an airplane pilot. You wouldn't want an airplane pilot to start inventing new ways of flying an airplane. You want them to stick with the tried and true. And certainly that is true in most cases. However, we also want our leaders to know when to get out of the box and apply an innovative solution. The key to success, one of the keys of success in leadership, is to know when to stay in the box and follow procedures that have been already established, and when you are facing a new circumstance that wasn't anticipated, and therefore you should use out-of-the-box thinking and apply an innovative solution. That's more an art than a science, but it's an interesting idea. Now, what we want to do, and you see this in the military, is, and this is contrasted with civilian experience. In civilian experience, you will see a lot of times people will say, me, 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 me. I am so great. I do so many great things. I am so wonderful. Don't you really want to promote me immediately? The military takes a dim view of that kind of attention getting. Their approach is to identify leaders who can execute to a standard without drawing undue attention to themselves. In other words, let your work be the beacon that draws people to you. Not that you are such a great person, but the effects that you create for an organization are what draw people to you. And then another concept that is very important is no whining. It is often said that generals are generals because they want to be generals. That is to say, if you want to be a leader, don't be a person who's constantly talking about negatives or difficulties or whatever. Underlying all of these things is integrity, which means whatever you say is so. I can count on your word. That is such an important concept. Can I count on your word? Should I be able to count on your word? So we might ask in closing 3 questions. How does your organization respond in the face of a catastrophe? Does it shrivel up? Does it launch forward? How do individuals respond when the leader is not present or not looking? Interesting question. And finally, how do you go about living your expressed values? Well, thank you for joining me with this segment. As I say, what we're going to do is investigate a variety of these concepts, and I hope they're of value to you in your own leadership journey. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.